it's an honor to be here today to introduce this bill and to hopefully clarify some of the misconceptions that are out there about my bill. Legislation that I'm introducing is to heal the device in our state that has fostered a spirit of mutual tolerance and respect. For the last 10 years, our country has been divided over the question of same-sex marriage. The question has divided churches, families, friends, judges, and believe it or not, a politician or two. Last summer, the United States Supreme Court ruled by a 5-4 vote that the state government must recognize same-sex marriage. Not everyone in the country agrees with the ruling or the change in the definition of marriage. However, it is currently the law of the land. Be very clear about that. The question is, how do we move forward in Georgia? I'm proposing that we proceed on a principle first articulated by those who fought for same-sex marriage, and that's simply live and let live. This bill is called the First Amendment Defense Act of Georgia and is modeled after legislation sponsored by our state senators Johnny Isaacson and David Perdue. The legislation does not challenge the same-sex marriage decision of the Supreme Court. It does not excuse a public official from doing his or her official duty with respect to marriages. But it does offer protection to private individuals and organizations who hold to the traditional view of marriage and that it should be between a man and a woman. It prevents governmental discrimination against faith-based adoption agencies, religious schools, youth programs, student organizations, and other nonprofit organizations whose sponsoring churches hold to the traditional view of marriage. No one wants these organizations to be criminalized because of their held belief, their belief in the tradition of marriage. Again, let me say, live and let live is the motto of the First Amendment Defense Act of Georgia. Faith-based organizations that believe in the long-held definition of marriage should have the right to operate freely without fear of persecution. One group's access to a right does not diminish the rights of another. Can Georgians who hold to the same-sex marriage live and let those who hold to marriage being between a man and woman live out their sincerely held religious beliefs? The First Amendment Defense Act of Georgia not only would ensure that there would be no discrimination for Georgians who view marriage as being between a man and woman, it would provide protection in tax treatment, including tax-exempt status for charitable organizations and charitable contribution deductions, government grants, contracts and subcontracts, cooperative agreements, guarantees, loans, scholarships, license, certifications, accreditations, and employment. It would also protect government benefits and entitlements, access to government facilities, educational institutions, and charitable fundraising campaigns, accreditation, license, and certification. The First Amendment Defense Act of Georgia in no way impedes, hinders, or otherwise interferes with same-sex couples' right to obtain a marriage license. It does not challenge the ruling of the Supreme Court that changed the definition of marriage. It simply protects the rights of those who continue to believe that marriage is to be between a man and a woman. The First Amendment Act of Georgia is important in ensuring that all Georgians are tolerant of each other's beliefs and that all Georgians can continue to pursue their dreams without discrimination. Let's come together as a state and show the rest of the nation that in Georgia we know how to reach humanity and human rights and harmony. We are tolerant, accepting, and understanding of everyone's right to pursue happiness. I'll take a few questions.
Isaacson said at the Georgia Chamber of Commerce breakfast that he didn't think that this should be a state issue, that this should be left for federal decisions. So why are you taking this up at the state level?
Well, how many other issues are we waiting on the feds to make a decision on? I think Georgia can take the lead in this. Yes, sir.
Senator Kirk, does I haven't read your bill, the entirety of your bill. Does it offer any carve-outs for for-profit public accommodation businesses.
For-profit.
A for-profit business that does business with the public.
Mhm.
Does it offer them protection in cases of if they choose not to do business with same-sex couples?
No, what this bill does is it explicitly says this is to stop government discrimination against such a company or such a person. It doesn't protect what you're talking about.
Do you think the government discriminates against those who believe marriage is between a man and a woman?
I think we've had cases of that, yes. Here in Georgia, let's see, we got a case now where someone was bivocational minister, and he applied for a job, and I think this is with the EEOC at this point. Eric Walsh, is anybody familiar with that case? This was a state employee who was also a bivocational minister who had had some of his sermon excerpts used against him because he preached against homosexuality, and so we have a case like that already in Georgia.
Senator Kirk, you
Yes.
Said that it doesn't change who would get marriage licenses. Would
Correct.
your bill protect an individual probate judge or probate judge clerk from who declined to issue a marriage license based on his individual beliefs?
In no way, shape, or form. In fact, the language is emphatically saying that you have no protection for performing your duty. When you're hired to do a job or you're elected to do a job, in the case of a probate judge, you have a job to do, and that does include issuing a marriage license. And there is language in the bill that explicitly says it does not give you any excuse to issue a marriage license.
Okay, and follow up, you mentioned the one case just a second ago. Do you view this as being a big problem here?
View what as being a big
Do
problem?
you view your bill as solving a big problem in Georgia?
I view my bill. You know, it's interesting. You come in late, then you do a follow-up question without even asking. But I view it as being proactive, and I view it as addressing some of the issues, like this one case I've already mentioned to you. We also have a little case with the fire chief here that, because of some of his views, we've got some issues about. Y'all are very familiar with that story. So I view it as being proactive in putting Georgia out front and taking the lead for our nation.
Senator, your legislation seems to be creating a new protected class against discrimination.
Mhm.
People who believe in traditional marriage, one man, one woman.
Right.
Would you be open to further expanding the protected class to include same-sex couples from discrimination?
I've been open from the very beginning. In the vetting of this bill, we vetted it quite a bit. In fact, this is probably the fifth rendition of it. I don't know, I kind of lost count. That will be dropped. I'm open and listening, but I do want to be very particular in pointing out that the problems that we have, just like the cases I've already referred to, deal with the people I'm trying to protect. And I also will say this. It's my opinion that millions of Georgians still hold to the traditional view of marriage, that it is between a man and a woman. And I definitely want to protect them, yes. It is open for a vetting process. That's what happens now. Once the bill gets dropped, it'll go through committees and we'll have a lot of discussion.
Senator
Kirk,
Just-
have you lined up co-sponsors or signers yet?
Yeah, in fact, I brought the bill with me. This is the actual bill, and I've been getting signatures. It has a lot of support from the caucus, as you can see from the number of signatures that are on the bill.
hold it back up again.
Nah.
Why? Why not?
I don't know what your camera does.
Well, are you afraid of that?
No, sir.
Then why wouldn't you show it?
Because you'll get the access to who signed the bill once
We-
the bill
it's-
is dropped. You saw a lot of names.
Are you dropping it today?
It's probably going to drop by end of business day, before I leave the Capitol today.
Well, what do you have to hide?
There's nothing to hide. I don't know what your camera does. I don't want you focusing in. Is there
Why
a
not?
problem with that?
Well, yeah, it's a public bill.
It's a public bill. It hadn't been dropped yet. It's not to that point.
But
Because
you
public
call-
knowledge.
You call a press conference and say, I've got a bunch of support here, but you won't say who's supporting it.
The majority of the caucus. And that's shown by the number of signatures that you saw. Did you not see the number of signatures?
No,
I didn't.
Oh. You see the number of signatures. Thank you.
Senator,
It's just a-
You can actually get the names once I drop the bill.
Senator, a version of the bill yesterday, and I don't know if what you're going to drop has changed from what was circulated yesterday, but that prompted a lot of criticism from LGBT pundits and groups who said it's basically a divisive and a threat to gay couples who have been legally married, and essentially provides for state-sponsored discrimination against them. Can you respond to that?
I don't see that any discrimination against gay couples in this. In fact, I've been very explicit in saying this in no ways impedes, hinders, or hurts them in any way in getting a marriage license. It doesn't excuse a probate judge or a clerk from issuing a marriage license. So I think that's a wrong argument. I don't know what bill was circulated yesterday. I've been pretty protective of this thing along the way. Some of you know because you've asked me and to share it with you, but I wouldn't. But it will be dropped, and you'll be able to read and see the names.
How is it different than Senator McCoon's RFRA bill?
It's a lot of difference, and we're here to talk about the First Amendment Defense Act, not the RFRA bill. The
Well,
RFRA bill, in a nutshell, the RFRA bill is a shotgun approach. This is very pinpointed and very specific. Yes, sir.
Does your bill for cities that have anti-discrimination ordinances on the books, a business, there's a controversy, a business says, nope, we're not going to do business with this couple. City comes in and says, nope, you have to do business with this couple or you're going to get fined. Does your bill stop that?
The bill will not allow the government to discriminate against that business because of their belief in the traditional definition of marriage.
Senator, Utah last year passed an LGBT anti-discrimination law that also included some religious exemptions. County clerks, for example, were required to set up a system where if a same-sex couple came in and a clerk objected, that couple would never know it. Another clerk would step in, handle the transaction, everything would proceed kind of as it's supposed to. Does your bill set up anything like that where state government or local government would be required to maintain that same experience regardless of the couple they were working with?
Well, and I'm glad you asked the question because that was one of the things that we vetted out as we've gone through discussion of this bill. And no, we did not set up anything. In fact, just the opposite is true. The language that's in the bill that addresses that says explicitly, any other provisions of this chapter, notwithstanding nothing in this chapter, shall be applied to afford any protection or relief to a public officer or employee who fails or refuses to perform his or her official duties.
So in that scenario, somebody working with DHS who was processing a benefits application for a same-sex couple would be expected to process that application even if they object to it?
Explicitly, yes. Yeah, there's no protection in this bill to not do your job, no matter who you are.
Your bill says that, as you've described, would prohibit the government from discriminating against persons who have a religious belief.
And organizations.
Or an organization from having, who have a religious belief that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that sex should be limited to that kind of relationship. It does not prohibit government discrimination against people who have other views as to marriage or to when sex is appropriate. Would that not make your bill an inappropriate viewpoint discrimination? Because it protects one kind of view about sex and marriage, but not other types of views. The government is free to discriminate against other viewpoints.
Right. Well, I think as those issues come up, and again, I've named you a couple of cases here in Georgia that are cases that this has actually happened, and this is one reason why we need this bill. I don't know of any cases where there's like a same-sex couple, I guess, that you would say that the government has discriminated against, and I think that they're protected under the decision of the Supreme Court. That is the law of the land, so I think they have protection already.
Senator, you said you vetted the...
You mentioned the Atlanta police.
Coming to you next.
The Atlanta fire chief.
Yes.
And the city says that the Atlanta fire chief was actually fired for forcing his employees to read a book rather than about the content.
The views of the book, yes.
Yeah. So how would this have protected him?
Well, I think that's yet to be determined in the court case because the fire chief says something a little bit different than the city does, so that'll be vetted out in the court system. And if it comes out that the fire chief side of the story is correct, then that's when this bill would kick in and protect someone like that. Yes.
So kind of a two-part question. You mentioned the fire chief and the other case,
Mhm.
both of which are moving through either the EEOC or the court system. So
Right.
isn't that remedy available? And then the second part of that is you mentioned that you vetted the legislation with a lot of different groups. Have you talked with LGBT groups about the bill?
That's a good question. That's a real good question. None of the groups have come to me to talk to me. I've had other groups come to me and talk to me. So what I have done, look, I'm 52 years old. I've grown up with friends who now live a gay lifestyle, but they're still very close friends to me, and I care deeply about them. And I have shared this with some of my friends and asked their viewpoint as well. And that's been part of my vetting process. May not be as big and all as maybe it could have been, but again, none of those groups have come to me to ask to vet this process.
And the first part of the question about the EEOC and the court system being available for people like the fire chief and the other person to take their complaints there, and that there's already an existing remedy for folks who feel like they may have been discriminated against.
Yeah, but the reason we come together as a General Assembly and we talk about different bills and issues that are going on is so that we can pass laws to try to keep people out of court. I mean, we don't want to say that court's going to be the answer of every situation, so why not be proactive, and especially on an issue like this.